What is up? It is Saturday, which means we are tackling the Week 12 running back tier list, going through my top 36 running back rankings, usage trends, bye weeks, injuries, everything that you guys should need to know to set your fantasy football lineup. So let's get this thing kicked off with the bye-mageddon, especially at this position. You can see we got some hammers on bye this week. Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Chase Brown, and Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, the Jaguars running backs. It is not a good scene out there in the running back landscape, so we're going to have to get a little bit disgusting this week and maybe start some players that we don't want to have to start. For those of you guys starting two great running backs this week, congratulations, you're in luck. Not a lot of people are in that situation. So we do have a couple injuries to discuss as well. Isaiah Pacheco being the first one. We thought he was going to be coming back this week for the Chiefs, but it does look like he will be out one more week with the injury, probably back next week, which means Kareem Hunt obviously sees a big time upgrade. Jonathan Brooks is expected to make his debut. He is listed questionable despite being a full practice really for like the last month of the season. So it's not a guarantee that he plays, but it looks like he probably will make his season and NFL debut for the Carolina Panthers. Dave Canales was basically asked what the workload split will look like, and he basically came out and said it'll be Chuba's backfield, and they'll find ways to get Brooks involved, but he will not be like on a pitch count necessarily if he's going to end up playing. And then a couple guys that have been ruled out. We have Tajay Spears out with a concussion, Alexander Madison and Zamir White, so the top two running backs on the Raiders depth chart, expected to be out with an ankle and quad injury respectively. So like I said, we're going to have to get real gross with Amir Abdullah this week. Getting into the locked in running back starts, so all these guys, you should know that they are in your lineup, but because we have a lot of bye weeks this week, there is some names that are not usually this high that are. Locked in running back starts 1 to 6 and 7 through 12. You guys can see some of the running backs that are in good matchups this week. We have Kareem Hunt versus the Carolina Panthers, 32nd ranked defense, and like I said, no Isaiah Pacheco yet again, so he's going to be in a smash spot. He's not usually in my top 12, but he is this week. Brian Robinson versus the Cowboys, easy spot for him there. Achane versus the Patriots, Gibbs versus the Colts, Walker versus the Cardinals, Jacobs versus the 49ers, and James Conner versus the Seahawks. Those are all the guys with really good matchups or above average matchups. Elite running backs that are in high scoring game environments. We have Derrick Henry versus the Chargers on Monday night, over under of 51 points. That's the highest on the slate. Gibbs versus the Colts, 50.5, also very high up on the slate. Kyron Williams and Saquon Barkley playing against each other. That is a 49-point over-under. Walker and Connor playing against each other. That is a 47.5-point over-under. And then CMC and Jacobs playing against each other, 47.5. And then Achane versus the Patriots, 46. Brian Robinson versus the Cowboys, 45.5, although the Dolphins and Commanders implied for most of those points. So definitely good spots for those guys. Elite running backs who are in bad matchups, so maybe temporary expectations for Derrick Henry against the Chargers, Kyron Williams against the Eagles, Saquon Barkley against the Rams, Joe Mixon versus the Titans, and Christian McCaffrey versus the Packers, especially knowing that Brock Purdy is not expected to start in this game. So I usually like to highlight a guy or two from this area. I'm going to highlight two guys specifically because I have a pick 'em for both of them, and also because they're not usually ranked in this area. Kareem Hunt, we've seen a big time workload from him over the last, 5-6 weeks since he's been the starting running back for the Chiefs. He's been basically an RB2 or better in every single game except for last week where he had a bit of a down performance. Going up against the 32nd ranked Carolina Panthers, they're like 12-point favorites on the road going to Carolina. We expect the Chiefs to probably control this game, be winning most of the game, and probably use a heavy dose of Kareem Hunt. So I actually really like him to go higher than 73.5 rushing yards over on Underdog, and we're going to be building out an entry throughout this video. My RB11, who's not usually ranked in this area, is Brian Robinson Jr. versus the 28th ranked Dallas Cowboys defense. He's been pretty productive in the last 4 games that he's played, despite really not being 100%. Like, he's been able to find the end zone and do his thing in the red zone, but we haven't really seen Brian Robinson fully healthy since like week 4. And before that happened, we looked like we were going to see Brian Robinson have like a really good season where he puts it all together and he's like maybe a back end RB1 or whatever, but then he started dealing with injuries, hamstring, knee injuries, so on and so forth. So I think he's getting back to full health. He's going to have a longer week to recover yet again, coming off of Thursday Night Football. So I think Brian Robinson could have a big time game in this Commanders-Cowboys game. The Commanders offense has had a pretty rough schedule the last couple of weeks, so them getting the Cowboys defense is a perfect get-right spot for them. So I feel really good about Brian Robinson. So we're going to get into the actual tier list now, going through RBs 13 through 18 first, starting with my RB 13. That is Aaron Jones, running back of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the 25th ranked Chicago Bears defense in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. This game environment's not great. It's not going to be like some high-scoring bonanza. The over-under is just 39.5 points. The under actually catching quite a bit of the steam. 34% of the sharp money going there. A lot of these Vikings games have had really high over-unders, and they've been getting burned by, low-scoring outputs, and it looks like the Vegas market has finally adjusted to that. Aaron Jones has been downgraded as far as a usage standpoint the last 2 weeks. So in week 10, he missed a couple of, series, a couple of quarters with a rib injury. He was in the medical tent. I think he was in the locker room for a brief amount of time. He was getting checked out, and then last week, Akers was a lot more involved than usual. So Aaron Jones has not exceeded 60, 70% of the snaps like he usually is in a couple of weeks now. He was a full practice all week, but he was last week as well. So it might just be one of those injuries that they're going to limit Aaron Jones a little bit, maybe dial back the workload. But this was the concern with Aaron Jones the whole time, which is why, week 4, week 5, I was talking about him as a good sell high. He was performing at like an elite RB1 level. And then as these seasons go along for these older running backs, the second they start getting banged up, it starts to factor into their output and their fantasy production. So Aaron Jones, I think he'll be fine going forward, but I will say, hopefully you sold him high in like week 4, week 5, when he was like by far and away like mid RB1 type of production. Running back 14 for me is David Montgomery versus the Indianapolis Colts. Montgomery, the touchdown machine, he's probably going to score yet again. I can't believe how accurate I was last week. I came on here and I said like word for word that he was going to rush for like 80 plus rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against Jacksonville, and he literally rushed for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns plus 20 yards through the air. So feel pretty good on that read. Like I said, I think the Lions backfield is pretty easy to read, and it's another one of these games against Indianapolis. The Colts are allowing the most carries to running backs in the NFL right now per game, and they have the 4th most rushing yards allowed as well. So I think it's yet another David Montgomery game. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, has been excellent too, so it's probably likely that they both get there, but that is right up Montgomery's alley, man, especially as the Lions look to cruise past another subpar opponent. I like David Montgomery to go higher than 56.5 rushing yards over on Underdog, and again, that will be number 2 of our entry, and we'll have the final one here in a second. Running back 15 for me is Jonathan Taylor versus the Detroit Lions. JT has not really been that great in bad matchups this year. We've seen, good defenses against the run be able to kind of stymie him and shut him down. Last week, we saw the Anthony Richardson show where he was probably playing his best game as a pro, but he did steal most of the red zone touches from Jonathan Taylor. I think it's time that we admit that JT might just be a little bit overrated, probably more low-end RB1, high-end RB2 than he is like top 5, top 8 running back in fantasy. He's RB17 in points per game this year, RB12 finished last year, RB17 the year before that. I get that he's been kind of hurt and stuff, but at some point when you're getting this type of workload like he's getting right now, which is consistently over 70% of the team snaps, you probably need to be producing like at a high-end RB1 level, especially when you're the talent that we all know Jonathan Taylor is. This one does not stack up well. I think this is a top 3 run defense, young quarterback who's going to be playing from behind. I don't think this is a really good spot for Jonathan Taylor, so I have him downgraded in the rankings as such. Normally he would probably be like a low-end RB1. But in this game environment, it's not a really, really good spot for him. So running back 16 for me in my rankings is Ramondre Stevenson versus the 26th ranked Miami Dolphins defense. Stevenson has been great the last 4 games, averaging 16 plus PPR points per game. He had a string of tough matchups the last 4 as well. If you go back and look at the teams that he's been ended up playing against, he's gone against like the Rams and like a bunch of other teams that are very solid against the run. So the fact that he produced at that high of a level in that stretch of time, and he was playing bad defenses or bad matchups for fantasy running backs, is definitely really encouraging, especially knowing that Drake May also looked like a functional quarterback in those games. The Dolphins are allowing 1.3 touchdowns per game to the running back position, which is 4th in the NFL. Ramondre Stevenson has at least 15 opportunities in 4 straight games and 21 opportunities in 3 of his last 4 games. So you're looking at a guy getting the volume. The offense is playing a lot better, like I said, with Drake May at quarterback. So I like Ramondre Stevenson to actually go higher than 73.5 rushing plus receiving yards because he's getting targets as well. He had like 5 targets in the only game he had sub 20 carries in. So that concludes our pick'em entry. Like I said, if you want to tail it, go down to the link in the pinned comment down below, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSC, sign up and deposit using that promo code, tail this entry, and you'll also get the free square Matthew Stafford to throw into it if you're a new customer, and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. If this entry hits, plus you have that free square, this would be a 10x of your original money. And of course, for the rest of the season, if you do make a play on the site with our promo code, you do get our weekly rankings manifesto for free for the rest of the season to help you out. So running back 17 for me is Tyrone Tracy versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I wanted to put him up higher than this, but there's a couple things going against him. The game environment's not great. I mean, Tommy DeVito and the Giants are an absolute train wreck right now. They're not starting Daniel Jones, as we know. Tommy Cutlets is playing quarterback. Malik Neighbors was a late addition to the injury report on Friday. He intends to play, apparently, but late additions to the injury report might indicate that he might be limited to some degree or altogether maybe ruled out at a surprise situation there. The Bucs are getting some horses back on defense and on offense as well, so it's not really boding well for this game staying close, and the run game probably has a little bit more of a tougher time than the 16th ranked Buccaneers run defense that would indicate, especially with a bad quarterback at the helm. I know Todd Bowles, as a Buccaneers fan, is going to hone in on stopping Tyrone Tracy, and he'll probably be successful in doing so, in my opinion. So if that's the case, we may have a situation like week 7 for Tyrone Tracy where his role is still solid from like a snap share standpoint, but maybe they pull the starters because it's a blowout or whatever. The Philadelphia Eagles were really able to shut down the Giants run game, and I think we could see something very similar. But again, the Buccaneers, not as good of a defense as Philly, but they are pretty good against the run still, and they're getting some horses back, particularly in the middle of their defense and in the secondary. So running back 18 closing out this tier is Najee Harris, who already played, of course, played on Thursday Night Football in the Snow Globe game, had 7.5 PPR points. Not great concerning that Jalen Warren outsnapped, outtouched, and outscored him for the first time all season, but he was kind of the hot hand in that game environment, in that matchup. Moving into the low-end RB2s tier, I think this is the really interesting part of the running back rankings because a lot of these guys are in pretty decent spots. Rachaad White versus the New York Giants, again, very similar to what I just talked about with Tracy. This is a smash spot for Tampa. I have both running backs for the Buccaneers in my top 24 because this game profiles very similar, honestly, to the Saints game that we saw a few weeks back where Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving both just like ran it down the Saints' throat. I do think we could see something very similar to that. The Giants are a bottom 10 run defense. They're 6-point underdogs. The Sharps like the Bucs right now. Neighbors is coming in banged up, and Tommy Cutlets is playing quarterback. So I'm not trying to be a homer here, but I really do think that Bucky Irving and Rachaad White are just going to take advantage of this game environment. And since White has been back on the field, he has still been the starter there. He's getting the receiving work, getting the majority of the routes. And even though Mike Evans is back and Jalen McMillan is back, I still think that Rachaad White is probably going to command a heavy amount of usage through the air in this game. So the usage has been excellent for both of these guys, but Rachaad White is slightly ranked ahead for me because of the pass catching work and the fact that if they do get inside the 5-yard line, he's the bigger back and probably gets those goal line touches. So this game environment presents a great opportunity for both running backs to produce. Running back 20 for me is J.K. Dobbins versus the Baltimore Ravens. Revenge game alert for him. Dobbins had a great finish last week versus the Cincinnati Bengals. I discussed him on my TikTok as a potential sell high because he does have just a brutal schedule down the stretch, but you're still starting him this week. I mean, against the Ravens, it's a revenge game. The Ravens versus Chargers, also 51-point over-under. And the Sharps are actually hammering the over right now. For what it's worth, though, the Ravens are only allowing 61 rushing yards per game to the running back position, which is the second lowest in the NFL. Only the Chiefs have been better against, rushing yardage to the running back position. So J.K. Dobbins maybe not in line for a huge day on the ground. He's probably going to have to get there into the end zone or maybe catching some passes. So running back 21 for me is Tony Pollard versus the Houston Texans, 4th-ranked run defense. So very tough matchup for him there. But Tajay Spears is out with a concussion. And when Tajay Spears was out, week 7, 8, and 9, you can see there, he was commanding well over an 80% snap share. Pollard hopefully is close to 100% now. He's not on the injury report anymore with the foot injury he was dealing with. So even though the Texans, they're a brutal run defense, very strong against running backs, Pollard's workload can carry him in this one. Next up, we have Bucky Irving. Again, very similar to what I said for Rachaad White. DeVito, game script. The usage has been great for both of those guys. I think that the Buccaneers are going to roll in this one. I think Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen are going to move the offense very, very well to the point that the running backs have a lot of opportunity for touchdowns and just for receiving targets and carries altogether. So Chuba Hubbard, my RB23 on the week versus the Kansas City Chiefs. 1st-ranked run defense, so terrible matchup for Chuba Hubbard. By the sounds of it, Jonathan Brooks will be active. Canales basically was asked straight up, will he be on a pitch count? And what he said exactly was no need. He will need to be ready. Jonathan Brooks is definitely going to need to be in there, and I quote, because if Chuba Hubbard has a shoelace untied or something, I think that was like a euphemism for injury, but basically what he's saying is that Jonathan Brooks will probably play the Miles Sanders role of past times. Maybe he works in more than that because Chuba Hubbard and him are kind of on a more level playing field than what Sanders was. My expectation is that instead of, let's say, 80-90% of the snaps like we've seen from Chuba Hubbard in the past, it's going to be more like a 70% snap share where he gets 15 to 20 touches and Brooks mixes in. It's the first game with both of these guys on the field, so we're going to need to really look at the usage from this one and see what matters going forward. But at the same time, it also is Jonathan Brooks' first career game. So it might be, Chuba Hubbard's show still for another game. And then as the weeks go along, it becomes more of a 50-50 split. All I know for sure is that the Chiefs are brutal against the run. And that combined with Jonathan Brooks' debut makes me want to downgrade Chuba Hubbard just a little bit in a big way. I mean, normally, if they were playing a good team right now or a good matchup and Jonathan Brooks wasn't playing, Chuba Hubbard would be in my top 12. But right now, bad matchup and Brooks making his debut makes me scared off of him a little bit to the point that I have him down here at 23. Javonte Williams versus the Las Vegas Raiders, I have at 24 right now. 30th ranked defense are the Las Vegas Raiders. So Javonte was benched in week 10. Literally, like Audric Estime was the lead back there. And then he comes out in week 11 and has a top 10 running back week on just 14 touches. So it's a really weird dynamic here with Javonte Williams. The Raiders are such an easy matchup that it makes me feel comfortable starting him. And the game script is probably going to be in favor of the run because the Broncos are a much better team than the Raiders are. And we don't know if it's going to be Javonte or if it's going to be Estime. But the big question here is how do we know which guy gets the touches? Because even despite Javonte Williams' big week last week, like I said, he only had 14 touches in that game. So even though he produced a top 10 scoring week and found the end zone, got the targets and all that kind of stuff, it's not like he was a workhorse. I mean, he only had 53% of the snaps, 36% of the rushing attempts total. We know Bo Nix likes to run the ball as well. So a little bit of a sketchy situation there for Javonte Williams, but the matchup is good enough that I feel comfortable starting him, and I'll talk about Estime here in a second. Flex plays tier, Nick Chubb, obviously great game on Thursday Night Football. Pittsburgh was 19th against the run, so it was a decent matchup for him. 19 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns. You love to see it, honestly, as a Nick Chubb bag holder in a lot of my best ball leagues. I feel really good about that pick now, knowing that he's starting to get back up to speed. Also, I mean, Sal didn't start him against me in the Flock League, so I guess there's that as well. And not to mention, too, Nick Chubb had 64% of the snaps in that game. Now, could have been game script. The Browns were actually winning that game, and also it was like the type of game environment, given the weather, that you would want to run the ball in. But regardless, I mean, it's good news for Nick Chubb all around that he's starting to work back into the full workload. Running back 26 for me is DeAndre Swift versus the Minnesota Vikings, second-ranked run defense here. I dinged him quite a bit in the rankings here for a couple of reasons. Number one, even though DeAndre Swift has been pretty solid all year, especially in the last 5 or 6 weeks, we did see his workload take a little bit of a hit. And the reason that's relevant, and I'm actually, paying attention to it, having only 48% of the carries and 54% of the snaps, is that Thomas Brown was in his first game calling the plays, and Shane Waldron is gone. So if that means that Roschon Johnson is going to be more involved in the offense, then that's definitely not good news for DeAndre Swift, because Roschon is a good running back, man. I think he actually might be better than Swift in a lot of ways. So if Thomas Brown is going to use Roschon Johnson more, then that means DeAndre Swift has to see a downgrade into low-end RB2, high-end RB3 territory instead of the mid RB2 that he had been. Vikings are also elite against the run, man. They're just such a good run defense. They're allowing only 65 rushing yards per game to the running back position, which ahead of the Chiefs and Ravens is third lowest in the NFL. So DeAndre Swift, given the workload dial back and the bad matchup, I have him down here at 26. Running back 27 for me is Rico Dowdle versus the Washington Commanders. They are 21st against fantasy running backs. We heard for a couple weeks now that Dowdle was supposed to be a workhorse. No more committee, they said. Well, he's still getting his exact same workload he's been getting all year, which is his usual 14 to 17 touches and 50 to 70% of the snaps, depending on the game script. So for me, it's a better matchup than Houston, Philly, Atlanta, and Detroit. Those were his last 4 games, which is a brutal murderer's row of run defenses. So against the Commanders, it's a much better matchup, but he's still a high-end RB3 because this offense is a complete trash can, and I expect the Commanders to probably win this game by a decent margin. So it's going to be a negative game script more than likely yet again for Rico Dowdle, but he's a half-decent play in a better matchup than he's been in the last few games. Running back 28 for me is Amir Abdullah versus the Denver Broncos, 14th ranked run defense. Surprisingly, we haven't gotten that gross this year at the running back position. I'm sure you guys know that this has been a relatively outlier year for running back injuries. We haven't seen a whole lot of guys go down. Normally by this point, there's 6 Amir Abdullahs on this list, where I'm talking about gross RB3s who have workloads and somehow they're RB2s because of the running back position. But because everybody's stayed healthy and been good this year at running back, Amir Abdullah is one of the first guys I've talked about that is just absolutely disgusting. Both Madison and Zamir White are both likely out with lower body injuries, which is why Amir Abdullah is on this list. Amir Abdullah actually found in the end zone last week and is the last 2-minute drill back that we have on this roster too. So the good thing for Amir Abdullah is that even if the Denver Broncos get out to a big lead, he's operating as the lead back, so he should still be involved in the game plan, especially knowing that he was normally the 2-minute drills back, even if Zamir White and Alexander Mattison were on the field. Like, when games would get out of hand, Amir Abdullah was in the game. So if this game he's the starting running back and the game gets out of hand, he should probably be playing a very, very high degree of the snaps. So I actually think he's a decent pickup for those of you guys that do have players on bye or whatever, and you're looking for a guy you can just pick up off the waiver wire. Amir Abdullah is not actually a bad option, given the fact that he should get the workload, given that Mattison and Zamir White are expected to be out. Running back 29 for me is Austin Eckler versus the Dallas Cowboys, 28th ranked run defense. Like I said, for Brian Robinson, this is a get-right game for the Commanders. He caught literally 1 million checkdowns last week. Austin Eckler led the team with a 39% targets per route run. Got to imagine he's suited and booted pretty much for another good performance. Eckler has been quietly very, very good the last 3 games. Top 13 running back in 3 straight weeks. Of course, 2 of those were without Brian Robinson, but still, he's getting 40-50% of the snaps, running as a slot receiver. Whatever he's doing, he's going to be getting targets. And I think just in general, I want pieces of this offense because I think they're going to score a lot of points. So Austin Eckler is a good play from that perspective. Running back 30, closing out this territory, is Jaylen Warren, who of course already played. Biggest snap share on the year. Also his best PPR output of the year as well, 15.4 PPR points. Snow Globe Thursdays are apparently Jaylen Warren's friends. So closing out this video, let's get into the deep league flex plays. And these are grosser than they usually are because of all the bye weeks. We have running back 31, Trey Benson for me versus the Cleveland Browns, 17th ranked against the run. James Conner has been 56 and 49% of the snaps the last 2 games, been in and out of the lineup during the game, going into the medical tent, all this bullshit, but it's causing Trey Benson to eat into the workload more, and they actually split carries 12-10 last week, which is the closest they've been all season. Plus, given that James Conner is old and prone to injury, there's always the upside that he's in the medical tent by the second quarter, and Trey Benson goes berserk in your lineup because Conner's in the medical tent or something. So make sure, first of all, he's rostered in your league because he's one of the best handcuffs in all of fantasy. But also, I do think in a pinch, you could actually start him because of that upside that he provides if Conner is banged up, or honestly, just on like 10 to 15 touches that he might get. He's an explosive guy. He can catch the ball, so on and so forth. So running back 32 for me is Audric Estime, who, like I said, for Javonte Williams, we just have no idea what the split is. In week 10, Audric Estime led the team in carries. In week 11, he did not. So I'm not exactly sure why that is. I'm not sure if Javonte is going to get all the carries again, or if it's going to be Estime, but on the off chance that it is Estime, I do think in a week where there's a bunch of bye weeks, you could throw Estime into your lineup as like a low-end flex play, like I said. Raheem Mostert, I mean, he's been so trash the last 2 games, not getting the work, in and out of the lineup, dealing with an injury. He had such a great matchup against the Raiders last week and really didn't do a whole lot with it, but it's a good matchup yet again against the Patriots. So if the Dolphins control this game, if they're able to run the ball really well, I do think that Achane and Mostert could have a lot of value. Of course, Achane is an elite running back, but Mostert even too could have a decent amount of value there. And then running back 34 and 35, I'll just lump together. Zach Charbonnet versus the 20th ranked Cardinals, Cam Akers versus the 25th ranked Bears. Both of these guys, they're basically handcuffs, and you're hoping that they get 10 touches, 12 touches, 13 touches. But on the off chance that Kenneth Walker's in the medical tent for a quarter or 2, or the off chance that Aaron Jones is ruled out for the rest of the game, then these guys would provide a big time ceiling in your lineup. That's why I like starting handcuffs who get a little bit of a standalone role a lot more than like Justice Hill, who is only going to be on the field for a couple passing downs and you're hoping he catches a touchdown. Whereas Charbonnet might catch the ball 2 or 3 times, run the ball 7 or 8 times, and you're kind of hoping that he gets there on those touches, and or Kenneth Walker misses a little bit of time during the game. So that's where I'm at with those guys. And then RB36 for me was Jerome Ford, who locked into my lineup. I thought the game environment and the game split of the workload would be a lot closer between him and Nick Chubb, but given the game environment that they had where the Browns were actually winning, not expected going into the game, considering the Steelers were a much better team, Nick Chubb ended up getting a lot more of the work, and that resulted in Jerome Ford not doing a whole lot. And not to mention, too, it was harder to pass the ball in that game, so Jameis Winston wasn't dropping back nearly as much as he was used to. So definitely that is the end of the top 36 running backs. Hopefully I helped you set your lineup. You can tail this entry, like I said, with Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery, and Kareem Hunt. I feel really good about those guys this week. So if you want to tail it, you can get this Matthew Stafford free square when you use code FSE, link down below in the pinned comment. If you want to check out all of our rest of season rankings, everything that we got going on over on the site. We're starting to get into some more Dynasty content on the site too. For those of you guys that are Dynasty players, people are starting to look at dropping their draft guides and so on and so forth. Us and all the other creators on the site are doing that. So definitely check that out if you guys are interested. And that is also linked down below in the pinned comments. So like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.